Okay, we're now in episode 20, and now we're ready to introduce Zechariah. In order to understand what Zechariah is doing, we have to go back to Psalm 90. That's why we went through that little trip about the meter. And I'm sure your head is kind of swimming right now, because mine was when I learned about it. And it took me a while to get a sense of it, so when I'm explaining it to you, if it's hitting you the first time, you're like, what the? So hopefully if you either replay, episodes 18 and 19 over, or just sort of like assume that what I'm telling you has some backup to it prior to watching the entire Psalm 90 video series, you'll be able to at least move ahead in this section where we're introducing really two topics at once. How we know Luke is wrapping around Matthew and telling us that it's Hanukkah, and how Mary's Magnificat is actually extremely sophisticated, which also references Psalm 90, Zechariah, Haggai 2, and it's kind of in reverse order. She references Zechariah in order to tag Haggai, Daniel, she's also referencing Daniel, Isaiah, and all the way back to Psalm 90. And she does it with meter. The Magnificat is metered Greek that's metered based on the same meter that Moses uses in Psalm 90. That's also what Isaiah did. That's also what Daniel did. Okay, and until you've seen the Psalm 90 videos, this idea of the meter and its importance is going to be kind of a blur to you. So, in case that's true, we're going to just go through the English text, because you'll be able to see in Zechariah's text, even in translation, that he's talking back to Psalm 90. This is one of the most important psalms in Judaism, okay, and many Christians consider it important too. But when you read it in English, it's very fuzzy. It's fuzzy on purpose. It's not really fuzzy. It's omnidirectional. And when you have omnidirectional language in the Bible, it sounds generic. Okay? This is a psalm of time. The Jews consider it that. The most famous among them being a guy named Rambam, who lived during the Middle Ages, and his Jewish name is Maimonides. You can look that up on the internet. He, based on rabbis even before him, considers that the whole world has got 7,000 years to go. The first 2,000 for the Gentiles, the second 2,000 for the Jews, the third 2,000 belong to Messiah. After that, time ends and the millennium begins, and that's, year 6,000 to 7,000. Because remember, the beginning of the first year is the year for that whole group. So the end of the 6,000th year is the beginning of the year that ends with 7,000, thus ending history with the millennium. That's Jewish thought. It is still Jewish thought. Not all Jews hold to it, just like not all Christians believe that Christ is God. But it is a strain of Jewish thought that goes all the way back to Moses. And this is why it goes back to Moses. It's this psalm highlighted in blue. But the reason it goes back this far, and the reason it's Psalm 90, is something you can't see in translation. It's a meter of time. And as I hopefully you got at least a glimmer of in episode 19 and 18, was the fact that there is a meter pattern that he uses. This is 350 syllables, just to quickly, summarize. It's 350 syllables. That 350 syllables does double duty. On the one hand, it's an annual syllable for year, sort of prophecy about how the judges period is going to go. Okay, and in the Psalm 90 videos, there are links to a Word doc I did showing you how it ties to the Book of Judges. Okay, because that's why the Book of Judges was written, to show that Psalm 90 was fulfilled. But on a deeper level, Moses is telling you the story of time up to and including a yet future time of when the temple would be rebuilt, but Jerusalem was not yet rebuilt, and also sort of characterizing the temple rebuilding period with the key word, confirm this work of our hands. Okay, stated twice. And this is very elliptical language. in the Psalm, in the Hebrew. It's very elliptical. Okay, you can't see that in translation because we supply words that aren't there in the Hebrew. You could interpret them as being meant, but you don't realize the poetic quality of it. So you don't know to look for meter. And so this is 350 syllables. On one level it ties to Judges, but on the deeper level, and this is what Rambam was referring to, it's a phrase about the times of history. This being the millennial. This is a testimony in advance of what people are going to say in the millennium. Okay, and you'll notice that the key word here is return. We're going to focus on that in this part of episode 20, because that's what Zechariah is going to focus on. And the second period of time is going back in time. It's retrospective exposition. That's a style of discourse. Go look up the term in Google. This is the period of Adam until Noah. Okay, so it's 1656 years from Adam's fall until the flood. Okay, actually just 70 years before the flood, approximately. No, 120 years before the flood, I'm sorry. Because the Noahic period includes Noah's own vote. So this is up to 120 years before the flood, from Adam's fall forward. This is the basic attitude of people during that time. This is an actor on stage playing out the lines of what people were thinking for most of that time. The majority attitude. Okay, and we're going to go through that a little because we're going to need it for Zechariah. This period, and oh, by the way, this is 70 syllables because there was one voting period. And he's characterizing the whole 1050, which actually goes to 1656 minus 120, is characterized by that period, and there was one 70-year voting period during it. Okay? So he's accounting time by 70s. It's a sabbatical accounting. Then the next voting period in history was Noah's, and Noah voted during that period. Before he matured, he voted. And as a result of his vote, he did mature, and he won time for mankind. And this is the testimony of his period of time. Verses 9 through 11. Again, it's 70 syllables for the voting period, and that was Noah was, voting during that time. So he's the main actor speaking. Okay, and we're going to cover that in more detail. And this is 12 through 15. This is the next voting period in history. Moses here is the actor. He's speaking autobiographically. He's the one who votes, and because of his vote, the Exodus can occur. See, God doesn't do a thing on anybody's behalf until they first believe. Okay? History is blessed by believers, as we're going to see in Deuteronomy 32:8 later on. I think it's later on. I don't think I've covered it yet. So this is Moses' own testimony for his own 70-year voting period during which he voted. That's when he went into the wilderness. Instead of being Pharaoh, he voted to learn God better, and at that point in his life, he had to leave being Pharaoh in order to learn God more. Okay, and then he learned God so much that God made him the leader of the people, and learned God so much that when God offered to destroy all the Israelites, Numbers 14, after he was leading them, they were so bad in the first year out from the Exodus that God said to Moses, knowing in advance Moses would say no, God offered to, just erase Israel and start over the nation with Moses. Moses refused. Okay? So that's after his voting period, but this is how it got there. This is what Moses was thinking. This is his testimony during his own voting period, which was another 70-year historical period. The next voting window is the one just before Christ, about 400 years before Christ. And that occurs right here, and that's when the temple is down, has been newly rebuilt, but Jerusalem is still in trouble. That's the story of Nehemiah. When Nehemiah goes back and he has to rebuild the walls. All he rebuilds is the walls. But if the walls are down, of course, the whole city is vulnerable, and of course the temple is vulnerable, so that's why it matters. And the key word that he uses here, each period has its own deft keyword to mark it. That's the key word for that future versus Moses, voting period. That's the period we're covering in Haggai and Zechariah. Okay, with generation just before it. All right. So that's the aim. Is this whole voting period wouldn't have happened because time would have ended if the temple hadn't been rebuilt, and everybody knew that. That's why Daniel prays what he prays in Daniel 9. He's praying for the restoration of time. That's why Daniel 9, 24, 25, 26, and 27 are talking about time. That's why that 490 is there. That's why the 62 weeks is there. Those are units of time. And Daniel used those units of time as meter, just like Moses is doing here. Okay? And God replies to Daniel using the same meter and explicitly stating the periods of time. And of course, to us in English, we have no idea where that comes from because we don't know the Hebrew. We don't know it's metered. And unfortunately, Christian scholars have been debating whether Hebrew even has meter because they're basing it on Western standards rather than looking at the Bible's own configuration. They've been arguing about whether the Bible has meter for 300 years. Okay, and you've got some scholars who even today, like Stewart, what's his first name? I got one of his, I want to say his name is Donald Stewart. He's a teacher at Gordon Cromwell. I have to go look another. Sorry. He's a. I'm not sure if he's still teaching, but he maintains Douglas Stewart, I think is its name. Where's my book of his? Yeah, Douglas. His name is Douglas Stewart. He's a teacher at Gordon Cromwell University. And he's written a number of books on exegesis for the Old Testament and stuff like that. He maintains, of course, that there is a meter, but he doesn't know about this meter. And there are a lot of others, and unfortunately they're the majority voice right now, who maintain that there's no meter in Hebrew. Well, because they're using Western standards and Greek standards and ideas of meter to establish what it is, instead of just counting the syllables. But if you count the syllables, you'll realize the math of them. And that's why I did the Psalm 90 playlist, showing the Hebrew and the Greek. Well, just the Hebrew, because it's only in Hebrew that happens. Showing the Hebrew so that you can prove it to yourself, live from the text, using the BHS. Okay, I didn't alter the text. Some people, in order to contend that Hebrew meter exists, have altered the text. I didn't do that. I used the BHS straight from BibleWorks. So, enough about the meter. Let's get into the text itself, because the text itself is tapped by Zechariah. Okay, just look at the translation is good enough for what we're going to do. It's off in places, but I'm going to ignore that. Prayer of Moses. Okay, this is part of the meter. It's the title, but it's part of the meter. Okay, and we're going to see that's also true in the Magnificat. Mary's prayer is metered like Moses is here. And when it says, then Mary said, that's part of the meter as a title of what she was talking about. Okay, Lord, you've been our dwelling place for all generations. Pay close attention to the wording. Mary's going to play on this. Dwelling place for all generations. So will Zechariah play on that. And then this is a statement of God's, eternal existence before, poetically phrased, so you'll remember it, not a dull statement. Before mountains born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world. That's not right, but I'm not gonna fix it's the land. It's talking about Israel's land here. Or you gave birth to Israel and the world, even from everlasting. This is a very famous phrase in Judaism. Okay? Me'olam ad olam. It means forever. And some people are trying to say that hell doesn't exist. Ignore that phraseology in the Old Testament to contend that there's no hell. Okay, it means forever. It's from eternity past to eternity future, really. Me'olam ad olam. You, God, there's no R in the verse. He's shouting. It's you, ata, el. Okay? And then here's where we start our return. You turn man back into dust. See, man, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That was Genesis 3. You will turn back into dust. Return to dust. Okay, that's the idea here. And say, look at, return, O children of men. Return, your bodies return to the dust from which they came. Okay? And then he says, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it passes by, or like a watch in the night. A watch in the night was a period of a few hours. Okay, they divided their watches. All right? And so he's saying, before it begins, it ends, even 1,000 years. And remember, when Adam started, he lived not quite 1,000 years because of his sin. Okay, but the timing was 1,000 years for a lifetime. That was supposed to be a lifetime. And then due to sin, the biology corrupts and corrupts and corrupts more. And then by the time of the flood, it corrupted so much that the people born after the flood couldn't live very long. Okay, it's a very interesting study if you're into mortality figures, which I have to be. It tells you an awful lot about the change in mortality rate. Okay, now look at this. You swept them away like a flood. See, now he's talking about the briefness of life. Okay, flood. The flood was known before Noah was born. Methuselah means when he dies, it happens. It means flood. It was forecast 1,000 years in advance. Okay? You swept them away like a flood. They fall asleep. It's kind of sleepwalking. In the morning, their grass like sprouts anew. Remember? This was supposed to be a lifetime. Okay, so he's talking about the beginning of the 1,000 years. And he does mean 1,000 years or a day. This is where the day of the Lord phrase comes from. This verse. Okay? In the morning, they're like grass that sprouts. In the morning, it flourishes, it sprouts. Toward evening, it fades and withers away. Okay? Now we have the next one. For we have been consumed by your anger. Okay, the way it's phrased in English here implies that God's anger is somehow unjust. That's not what the Hebrew really says. What it does say is that this is how we think of ourselves. We think you're unjustly angry at us, and we are consumed by anger at you. There's a double entendre in the Hebrew. We are consumed by anger at you, and we're claiming that you're angry at us. Psychological defense mechanism of projection. Okay? And by your wrath, see again, blaming God, we have been, and it's not dismayed here. It's tearing our hair out. I believe that's the one that's got bahal in it. Strongest word for upset in Hebrew. Yeah. Here it is, bahal. It's not just dismay. It's like tearing your hair out, screaming, yelling. A modern Jewish term for this in English is tumult. Okay? Is that we're just rabidly upset as you can be. In other words, by the end of our life, this is what we think. This is what the usual thought pattern is of a person. They've learned, you grow up when you're in your 20s, everything is nice and rosy, and you have high expectations. By the time you're 30, you're beginning to doubt those expectations. Things begin to look a little strange. And by the time you're 40, you're just sort of just trying to make it through life. And by the time you're 50, you're jaded. It's about your 50s, most people begin to realize, life is just not what it's cracked up to be. And they start to look for something better. This is when you start to believe in God the most. I mean, if you're going to just map it like a scatter diagram, most of the people that believe in Christ are going to believe before the time they're 21. And then they get jaded between age 21 and 50. And around your age 50, you start looking at the God question again. That's the history of most people in life. And when you're disgusted with the idea of God or whatever, you might sublimate your interest in God into ritual or doing good works and stuff like that, where God is just, a rote thing to you. This is really the attitude at the end. You're ticked off. God hasn't lived up to what you thought he ought to do. And you're bahal. I mean, even the sound of the Hebrew word makes bahal. You're pissed off. You're tearing your hair out inside your thoughts. You're really angry at God. Okay? And so you're not surprised to see the next verse. You have placed our iniquities. This is awon, and it means twisted sins. It does have a connotation of hiding. You twist the truth and then you hide it from yourself, that you've twisted it. God knows all that, and they're right before him, in front of him. Okay? Our secret sins in the light of your presence. Okay, so see, here's our attitude at death. This is all part of the Adamic testimony, but it's obviously true afterwards too. And you have placed our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. The reason why that wording is here during the Adamic period is that Adam knows that it's going to end with a flood. All right, not just Adam, but everybody alive at that point. They know about the flood. That's why Methuselah was named Methuselah when he was born. Okay? All of our days of decline and of fury, we've finished our years like a sigh. And that's pretty much how the Hebrew really reads. Okay? Because we're being consumed by anger at you, and we blame you for it. And so you play to our false idea of you and show wrathful behavior. And it's really designed to get us to wake up and smell the coffee. But instead we shake our fist and tear our hair out. Baha. Okay? And so here we are feeling sorry for ourselves. And that's part of the Noahic period, which makes a lot of sense, because this is Noah's vote when everybody else was thinking like that. Okay? And this is prescient, because he knows that the flood is going to occur, because he's already rebuilding the boat. Okay, as the days of our life, they contain 70. This is the life expectancy that's going to happen after Noah, gets delivered. But this is also very clever, because 70 years is the voting period. Noah is voting, and he knows he's voting during the voting period. And here, if it were his words, he'd be admitting that this is how mankind thinks and therefore ought to die. And he's also voting during what he knows is a 70-year voting period. Or if due strength, 80 years. Okay? And of course, Moses is writing this, and at the time Moses is writing, that is the normal life expectancy. Moses, of course, is 120 years, and it says somewhere, I forget, it's either in Deuteronomy or Numbers, that Moses was 120 when he died, and he had lost nothing of his youthful strength. His eye was still as good, his strength was still as good. But everybody else, this is the norm. That is still normal life expectancy today. Although we tend to use mortality tables that are like Moses. It goes up to 120. Most mortality tables that are used for life insurance and annuities and stuff like that will go up to 120. But most people actually die during this period, even today. All right? And then, see? Okay, so fine. You even live that long. All your pride is and this is mistranslated, but it's all right. It's a little too weak. But labor, this is the kind of labor that Rehoboam was going through. I'm going to make myself important. I'm going to make myself important. I'm going to make myself important. Yeah, and all your work just ends in sorrow. You don't achieve your goal. So at the end, you're ticked off that you worked so hard. Even if you achieved a lot, the more you achieve, the more it's going to bother you. The conqueror worm takes over. And that's what's being said here. We're all too soon, it's gone and we fly away. Okay? Who understands the power of your anger and your fury? Okay, this is rhetorical in the Hebrew. Everybody understands the power. Okay? Your so-called anger and your so-called fury, his righteousness is being violated. He's gonna answer that. And this is totally mistranslated. According to the fear that is due you. This is according to your own respect for your righteousness. And I go through that in the Psalm 90 videos. Okay, it's not our fear, it's God's own respect for his own righteousness. It's elliptical language, and that's why they kind of miss out on the translation. Because if you're translating in a hurry, I can't tell you how many mistakes I've made when I've translated in a hurry. You've seen me make some. So, I mean, it's okay that they mistranslated it, but just go to the Hebrew and get the dual entendre there. It's God's own respect. Yareh means respect, not just fear. And God doesn't fear anything, so he's talking about God's own respect for his own righteousness, and therefore the policy of his anger and fury must take place. So, who understands? Again, this is the end of the Noahic testimony. Yeah, Noah understands, everybody understands. Okay? So it's rhetorical. In other words, the only reason they don't understand is they're negative to God. Alright? And then we begin Moses' own testimony. Teach us to count our days. See, it's a prayer about time. It's a prayer teaching. This is what's so rich about this. See, if you just say teach the number of our days, and you don't know that it's metered, and you don't know that it's a psalm of time that does number the days going back to Adam, you miss out on the ironic richness of the phrase you see highlighted in blue. Teach us to number our days. Yeah, and that's exactly what Psalm 90 does do. So when somebody's reciting Psalm 90 in Hebrew, they understand that that's what it's for, and the Psalm 90 itself is an answer to this vote of Moses that he made before Israel was delivered. God is answering that section of Psalm 90, prayed, technically speaking, back, 70 years prior, or 80, when Moses was still in the wilderness. God is answering it by giving this to Moses to write. And he's writing this at the same time, that he did Deuteronomy 32. This is his swan song. He's just about to die, and this is his parting shot. And one of the things that was typical for, fathers to do when they were about to die is they gave prophecies. And that's why this psalm is so important. Deuteronomy 32 is a prophecy, and so is Psalm 90. Deuteronomy 32 is probably metered also. When I started to read it, it kept hitting me. Count the meter, but I haven't done it yet. Okay? But this I have done, so you can check it. You can look at it. All right, that's the next verse. So God's already answering it by Psalm 90, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom, so we know what time it is. Remember when the Lord later says, golly, you can look up at the sky and you look at the color of the sun and you know when it's going to rain. How is it you don't know what time it is? And back in Matthew 1, the Pharisees and the chief priests and the scribes who are in charge of the calendar, they don't know what time it is. Oh, but they know what any schoolchild knows, that Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. And that's all they tell Herod? That tells you how dumb they were. And Matthew leaves out the fact they don't know Haggai 2. To be kind of quiet about how wrong they are. Because the reader should know. Especially when he gets to Mary's Magnificat. Okay, so teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Okay, now here we go again. Do return, O Lord. Now look at that, because this is what Zechariah plays on. This, how long will you stay away from us? He's speaking prophetically. Okay, he was voting that while he was out in the wilderness, because Israel, of course, had not yet been regathered out of Egypt. But see, you turn men back into dust and say, return. You have been our dwelling place for all generations. Again, you might remember the word generation is dor, and it comes from the word for a circle, which means a cycle, which means a circle and a cycle of time. Okay, so this is where he first introduces the idea of turning, returning, okay, and of course God is timeless, but God says return, and so he says, do return, O Lord. How long will it be until you, rescue us out of Egypt? And be sorry for your servants. Okay? And then he says, satisfy us, Baboker, in the morning with your chesed, your loving kindness, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. And this is the key to it. Make us glad, okay, according to it, Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. Moses is asking for an equating of time. All right, this is really important. That's why Isaiah is structured the way it is, as hopefully you saw in episode 19. Because that's why Isaiah bases his prayer like that. He uses doubled 42s, doubled 28s, doubled 56s, doubled 70s, okay, doubled 35s. That's why he does it. He's playing off this. Make us glad for as many, according to is not right. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. That's the key to how God accounts time to Daniel. He reimburses the time that the temple was standing. He reimburses the time that Israel had evil. That's why it's not just 70 years that Israel's out from 586 to 516, but it's 140, because when you reimburse the negative, you have to do two positives. And it's all based on this. And this was Moses' vote before Israel was restored, before Israel was created, before she had her first birthday. God is answering Moses' prayer during the voting period that Moses voted. And that's why Moses came back and freed the people from Pharaoh. It's based on this. And God is a real stickler for reimbursing time. Okay? And that's why he's doing it, and that's why Isaiah 53 is in those doubled patterns. He's playing on this. He's showing that it gets fulfilled. All right? Then, let your work appear to your servants and your majesty to their children. This is a prayer for the incarnation. But the incarnation can't happen without the temple, because Christ is the temple depicts. Messiah is represented by the temple, because he's going to indwell. Emmanuel, God in us, God in him, God with us. That was what the dwelling of the Holy Spirit, the glory in the temple that filled the temple in 1 Kings 8, that's what it meant. That's what it presaged. And of course, there's no temple at all when Moses is writing this. But he knows there's going to be one. And that's what he's saying. Let your work, okay, well, the work is the work of the temple, appear. There has to be a temple. So it was down. Appear to your servants and your majesty to their children, okay, which of course God fulfills. And then let the favor of the Lord be upon us. Well, without the temple, there's no favor. That's the terms of 1 Kings 9, when Solomon prayed once the temple was dedicated. So if the temple's down, the favor's down. That was the terms of 1 Kings 9. Go read it yourself. That's what the Solomonic prayer and God's reply to it. And confirm the work of our hands. This is what Daniel was basing his prayer on. Psalm 90 verses 16 and 17. And he meters based on it. Okay, so to introduce us to Zechariah, I'm sorry this is so complicated, but the word is like a tapestry. Every thread ties to every other thread. And each new book has to wrap around the prior book. And Zechariah is wrapping around Psalm 90. Okay? So that's why we have to go through this. Do return, how long? This particular part of it is going to be quoted by Zechariah. Okay? And then Mary's going to play on it. And be sorry for your servants. All right? Have compassion. Not be sorry, really. It's have compassion. Rachem. And she's going to use that phrase, which is funny, because Rachem, although it means compassion, it is actually a physical word for womb. She wasn't dumb about scripture, boy, oh boy. So she's going to play on all this. And she's especially going to play on the fact that compassion and womb, are the same word. All right. There are other words for compassion too, but the word here being used is rechem. Let me show you. This is hysterical. Okay. Let me get the... Okay. Oh, it's Nahem. I'm sorry. She's going to use the other word for it. Nahem is like the Lord repented. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, because he's using Nahem here. Okay, where is it? All right, there you go. Okay, so this is, all right. The other main word for compassion is rechem, and it means womb, but it also means compassion. And that's something that Zechariah will use, and that's something Mary will use. It's hysterical. But they're both playing on this part of it, because Zechariah uses admatai, which is right here. We're going to see that. That's what Zechariah, the actual text that Zechariah also uses. Okay, and Nachem is used here, but they change it to rechem, which is hysterical. Almost died when I saw it. Okay, so summing it up, return. Here's the theme: return. Return to God, return to the land. Return means Jubilee. Return means that Israel's restored. Return means the millennium. That's why it's housed here in the first 4 verses. Because God is returning Israel to the land. He's returning time to the promise. He's returning, to earth. Messiah's returning to earth. All that wordplay. Okay? And then, do return, O Lord, how long? Okay, there's no will it be, it's just Admatai, how long? And then this is Nachem. Thank you, God, that you caused me to go look it up. Alright? So those are the things, and then this part. Okay, confirm to us the work of our hands. And then this is the key to the whole deal. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. Okay. So, what have you seen? You've seen that this is the millennium. This is the Adamic period and their testimony. I'm going to let you read that in your favorite translation at leisure. This is the Noahic testimony. Okay? This is Moses' own testimony, which is being answered by God as he writes, because this is the Psalm of Time telling what time it is. And this is the yet future 7-year voting period, which is only 56 syllables because the other 14 are up here, totaling 84 syllables, which is why Isaiah plays off this part and makes his chapter 53 into equalities of 42, 35, 56, 28, and 70. It's perfect. And we have it perfectly preserved too. And year by year, Isaiah will go through when this happens, which Daniel 9 will use as a calendar to track when he prays Daniel 9, and he will also follow this same meter. And the amazing thing is that Mary is so adept at it that she will meter her Magnificat. Just blows me away. But before I can even show you that, I got to cover Zechariah and how he handles the words of Moses here. And again, the key words are here: return, return. That's what he plays off the most. This and this. And he's going to show how the return is fulfilled. That's the theme of this book. Okay, we still got to cover a little bit more of Daniel 9 so that you'll be able to spot the keywords in Zechariah when you see them. We've gone over this partly. This is your introduction, where Daniel gives his own timeline. Mary does the same thing in her Magnificat, and actually Paul borrows from what Mary does. I didn't know that until today. This is a date line. It's the same thing that was done in Psalm 90. The first 84 syllables serve as a date line of when Moses wrote. And I cover that extensively in the Psalm 90 videos. And here also Daniel is datelining when he wrote, which is the beginning of the 49th year of captivity. And how you understand that and know that is very extensive, and I cover that also in the Psalm 90 videos, beginning of, I want to say, about episode 23, 24, somewhere in that range when I start covering Daniel 9 of the Psalm 90 video playlist. So that's his opening. We're just going to look at the text now like we just did with Psalm 90. So that's his opening. This is his first, when he first starts talking. And this is where the meter actually starts. And then he says, and it's very repetitive, we have sinned, we've not listened to your servants, oh, you're right, but we're wrong, open shame, we have sinned against you. It's over and over. He keeps saying the same thing in different ways. Here we got our word rechem. So I'm going to show it to you, because this is what Zechariah actually uses, this word, playing to Daniel. And then Mary will tap Zechariah, because she's using Greek. And then she uses other Greek words that play on the womb concept. It's really hysterical. Okay, here's your word, compassion, in English, is how it's translated, but it really means womb. And of course, you won't find that out in Strong's, because Strong's is weak, and actually, Strong's was meant for people who already knew Greek and Hebrew. It was just used as a mnemonic. But here is the word, harechemim. It's plural. Okay, and see, look, the root meaning of the word is womb. All right? And the idea is that, when a woman's pregnant, she's very tender and, kind of sobby. The genes, not the genes, but the endocrinology, the endocrines change a lot. And so women can be, easily they cry and stuff like that. So that's why it comes to mean compassion. And it's also denoting, a mother's compassion. Fathers, as far as I'm concerned, are just as compassionate as mothers, but, women are known for being criers and, oh, spare him and all that. We're famous for that. Okay, so that the word highlighted in blue is rechem. And as you can see, it first means womb, and then it comes to mean, figuratively, compassion. All right. So Daniel is busy reciting, and this is an actual annual indictment, king by king. This starts with David's reign. This is Solomon, and then each king in order, chronological order, after that. And I extensively document, syllable by syllable, the chronology of the kings, and I match it up with the verses in Kings and Chronicles, so you can look at how apt his text is for the particular king that's occupying this section or this section of his text. But on the surface, he just seems to be repeating himself. Okay? We have sinned. We have not listened. Okay? You're right, we're wrong. We're wrong whether we're inside Israel or out. We're all unfaithful. We've committed against you. Open shame is ours. It's mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, kind of, almost like he's bobbing in front of the wailing wall. On the surface, that's what it sounds like. That's not what he's doing. He's laying out a chronological indictment. See, when he says kings, if you knew that this was metered, and if you knew that this was a metrical review from David forward of the king's disobedience, then when you're seeing this text explicitly, you're getting much more out of it. On the surface, if you do not know that this is metered, you don't get very much out of it. It sounds kind of like Daniel's crazy. He just keeps repeating himself. Why? And in fact, that's how this prayer struck me when I first had to listen to it. I had to listen to the exegesis of my pastor, and I didn't want to. And I was being beaten on. I kept on being reminded, and it turns out it was from the Holy Spirit that I was reminded. Get it? It's metered. Pay attention to this. I had no idea at the time. Why? Yeah, well, I know now. And I get to explain this to you. Okay, so this is going to be something that our dear boy Zechariah is going to tap into. Okay? And it keeps on going. We haven't obeyed. Sounds more repetitive. Walk in his teachings. Blah, blah, blah. You've transgressed. Sounds the same, right? Except he's in a different period of time here. In fact, this is the period where he's talking about Manasseh and how God swore he would take down the temple due to Manasseh. Okay? And that's why it says, and this is what it's picked up by Zechariah and then by Haggai, because Haggai picks up on it too, but principally Zechariah. This is what we saw already. That was when Zechariah came out, Zechariah 1. We're going to say it again. When he comes out in the 8th month, which is between the Feast of Booths, 7th month, that's Haggai 1 and 2, rather, beginning of Haggai 2. When he comes out in the 3rd week of the 7th month, Zechariah comes out again 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks later and reminds them of this part and this part, especially fathers. Don't be like your fathers. You see? So Zechariah is reminding them of these sections in Daniel. Okay? Especially this part. And this part in Daniel's chronology is focusing on Manasseh. Okay? And you can read about that. Again, I refer you to my Daniel 9 videos because I did an extensive cross-sectioning of the Kings and Chronicles passages to show you exactly what syllables meant what king, so that you could compare. All right, but this is the highlight of it. This is the centerpiece right here, 11 and 12. Then he repeats it again because he's still talking about Manasseh, and that's the time, of course, of Isaiah. All this calamity has come upon us, and see, and that was the reply in Zechariah 1 when he comes out in the 8th month. And he tells them, don't be like our fathers. Don't be like your fathers. Don't do this. This is what happened to your fathers. And what did they say? God has done to us what we should have done. God was right to bring this calamity on us, just as Moses had warned. And where does it mean Moses had warned? Well, it is written in the law of Moses. Okay, that's Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. It's also forecast in Psalm 90 verses 16 and 17. It's also forecast in 1 Kings 9, which was said by Solomon, which was the promise. The temple goes down if you're unfaithful for long enough. Okay, and that's of course the pattern of Leviticus 26. It goes in like 5 different stages of punishment, and the final one is that the temple goes down. So when the people were hearing Zechariah in the 8th month, they affirmed that they knew he was talking about Daniel because this was their reply. Okay? All this calamity has come upon us justly. This section right here. Alright? And this one. See? That's how Daniel closes his indictment. And in the timeline, in the meter, he's full circle back to where he started. He started in current time, went backwards to David, and by the time he finishes here, he's back to his own captivity. Okay? So, this is Daniel's petition. Alright, now look at what his petition is. See? Egypt. What did God bring up? God is quoting Daniel to the people in the land, to Haggai, when he talks to them when? In the 7th month, and in the 6th month, he made a comparison of their difficulty to Egypt. And he said he's going to shake the heavens and the earth. First he compares it to Egypt, and then he said he's going to shake the heavens and the earth, which is what he did when he brought them out of Egypt, with a mighty hand. And this is Daniel's basis for his petition, because he's citing the precedents of taking them out of Egypt. And of course he's hearkening back to Moses. And his whole timeline does that. Okay? This, I don't want to dwell on it because it's probably going to be confusing to you. But when he's dating his date of captivity, first of all, in terms of time the temple was down, but more importantly, since Moses. He's using a meter that in sevens dates back to Moses. Okay, and then he begins at David's kingship because Isaiah began at David's birth. Okay, so he's wrapping himself around Isaiah 53 also, but I don't want to make this too complicated because we're going into Zechariah now. So, and now you brought your people out of Egypt. Here's the precedent. You saved us once when we didn't deserve it. So we need you to save us again now that we don't deserve it. Okay? We have sinned. We're wrong. Okay? So he's not saying deliver us because we're right. He's saying deliver us because we're wrong. We were wrong when we were in Egypt too. Do it for your own sake. See? See where it says turn away? That's where the word Hebrew comes from. Okay? He's used it several times in this passage. It's to wander. Don't let your wrath, turn your wrath away from. But it's also a play on turn, return. Remember in Psalm 90, turn to dust, turn back to dust, return to dust. Okay? So he's asking God to turn away from, return away from his wrath and his anger. All that meaning is in there in the wordplay. Okay? So he's saying return to us. He's saying return to us ad matai, except he knows how long. Remember that was what Moses said in Psalm 90:13. So he's doing the same thing as Moses. Moses voted during the 70-year voting period that was historical. This is a non-historical 70-year voting period, but it becomes a voting period because the temple's down. 70 years the temple's going to be down. And he's supposed to start praying after 49 years are up, because those were the number of missed sabbatical years. Okay, and I go through the extensive proof of that in my web pages that are related to this. So if you look at the Daniel 9 videos, you can find the web pages, or just send me a message and I'll send you the links. They're extensive. So now listen to our prayer. Let your face shine, that's number 6. Let your face shine, meaning, so the word starts to be taught again. Like your face shone on Moses, on your desolate sanctuary. Okay? Incline your ear, turn down, tune down. If you're returning to somebody, you're listening. And open your eyes. These are all anthropopathisms. Okay? We are not representing. Okay? Hear and forgive. See, these are synonyms for return to us. Alright? This is what Zechariah is telling the people to remember in Zechariah 1, and he's going to do it repeatedly from Zechariah 1 onward. Okay? And then, of course, he's getting his answer before he even finishes speaking. And I didn't check it, but I don't think that this part is metered. Alright? But this is metered, and I cover that in my Daniel 9:24 video, which is an hour and 24 minutes long. Longest video I've ever done. Okay? And I show you that meter, and it's got a Word doc associated with it, so you can download it and count the syllables yourself and see if I made mistakes. Other than the mistakes that I made during the video, which I had to correct with egg on my face during the video. Too bad. Alright? So that's Daniel. So he's saying return. He's not using the words. Well, he actually is, but they don't show them all. But he's saying turn. He's saying turn back to us. Return, O Lord. Alright? And this is where he says it. Return. And several times he had said, but you can't always see it in translation. When it says we turned away, let's see if I can show you some of them. Hold on, I'm trying to see if I can. Turned aside, that's another use. Okay, that's related. Let me see if that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. Where is it? Here we go. Surah. It's turning aside defection, and it's related to shuf. There are other ones. Okay, one in particular is the wandering, and that's the word that Hebrew comes from. It's turned aside, translated turned aside here, that's sur. And then the curse was poured out on us. Oath was written. Where else is it? Turning from. That's the word for return. That should be shuv. It's hard to remember which words are which when they're related. Hello? Yeah, this is shuv. This is the word that's translated return most of the time. Probably the most famous word in Judaism. Shuv. Turn back, return. But it's also used sometimes for turn away when you should be turning back. Okay? So turning from, returning to God, is turning from iniquity, turning from or twisting. Okay? So returning away from is the way it's being used here. But the reason why he's using shuv is because shuv is so pregnant a word for turning to God, returning to God. So see, he's using shuv here to turn away from iniquity in order to return to God. You get that wordplay? Okay? And then let's see. Brought your people out. You sinned. See if he uses it anywhere else. Turn away from. And that, I think, was sur. Didn't we look at that already? Oh, that's shuv also. See, return to Jerusalem. Turn away by returning to Jerusalem. Where is it in the text? Hebrew drives me nuts because of the block letters that we call fashionable today. Where is it? Shuv. Of course, it would help if I sat closer to the computer. Magnificat. Here we go. Right here. Okay, here it is. It's in the cow. Alright. So there you go. That's he's using shuv there again, but it's translated as turn away from Jerusalem. That's pairing off with we didn't turn away from our iniquities in order to return to God. He's saying turn away your wrath from Jerusalem in order to return to it. For your name's sake is how he's going to close the prayer. Alright. So that's shuv, and that's the key word that Zechariah is going to use. That's why I'm bringing all this up. Listen to our prayer. Let your face shine. Okay, and I think that's it. Okay, yeah. All right. So hopefully you got some sense of the Daniel terminology that Zechariah is going to play on. Chiefly this idea of turning, returning, just like it was in our friend Psalm 90. And that's hopefully where we're going to go next and start finally covering Zechariah. Now remember, the key word is return, turn, how long, generations, and especially compassion. Because the other Hebrew word for compassion, right here, is rechem, which is used right here. And Zechariah is going to use that word, and then Mary's going to play on it with Greek synonyms. It's hysterical how she does that. Okay, next up is Zechariah.